If you've been in the prepper community any amount of time, you've heard of the rule of threes. And that's 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food, 3 months without hope. Now, water's at the front of that because it is very, very important. And I thought this morning we would have a conversation about full spectrum preparedness, fundamental of water, and the different aspects from a larger point of view. So stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back to Grumpy Acres. We're going to talk about water this time. And if you haven't been following my full spectrum preparedness and homestead videos, what we're doing is we're going through the 10 different fundamentals of full spectrum preparedness, and we're going to talk about each one of them individually. The first one we did was about food, and I did it first because it's the one that people can grasp the most easily and start working on the quickest. But in my mind, water is probably behind the cognitive, spiritual, and mental preparedness aspect is probably the most important one because you can't survive, plain and simple. And one thing the last year's taught me is that water preparedness on a homestead or in somebody's preparation plans is probably the most underprepared thing that people have. I was shocked that this is the first year that we ran an entire homestead off of water coming out of a tap. I had some ponds. I had water catchment that I used at the old place, and I never really paid attention because the water was always there. We got enough rainfall that the cisterns were always full, and I was able to do it. Well, I was kind of shocked at how much we actually used when I got the bill and I was actually paying for it. And here's an example for you. So 5,000 gallons of water storage equals 1.36 years, approximately 1 year, 4 months, and 10 days of water for a family of four, at a consumption rate of 2.5 gallons per person a day. Now, that's 2.5 gallons. That's your hygiene, that's drinking water, and that's food preparation for you. May sound like a lot, but it actually isn't. And you add on to that, in the height of the summer, my flock is drinking anywhere from 55 to 100 gallons of water a day. The bigger the flock gets, the more water they consume. So, I really think people are underprepared on it. So we're going to talk about the aspects of the fundamental of water preparation when it comes to full spectrum preparedness and full spectrum homesteading. And this is a high level view of it. We're not going to talk nuts and bolts very much. We're just going to talk about things that you should be looking for on a property and some things that you should do, some an action plan, if you will, on what you could look at. And this list that I'm going to use came from a evaluation tool that a buddy of mine and I built for Yoda when she was a real estate agent, so that she could give a score to a piece of property from a preparedness standpoint. And it worked out pretty good. I did it on my own property, and it gave us a pretty good feel of how much preparedness was at the property. How much potential there was. So the first thing you need to do whenever you're looking at a property or you're evaluating your property, the first aspect is water sources on the property or near the property, and some questions you need to ask yourself. Is the property serviced by a municipal or rural water system? That means, are you tied into an existing water system that some other entity manages, right? This is important because you do not have ultimate control over your water at that point, and if something should happen, it could cause a lot of problems for you. Another couple of things that you need to look for is wells. Is there a shallow well? And when I say a shallow well, I mean a well under 40 feet, a well that could be hand dug if need to be. What's your static water line for that area, and then a deep well or a drilled well within 1,000 feet of the property. Hopefully it's on your property, but it could be nearby too. And the reason why I say 1,000 feet is because water weighs a lot to carry, and 1,000 feet is probably as far as your average person could lug two buckets of water. Um, so a gallon of water weighs about 8.2 pounds. So 5 gallons of water is about 40 pounds. And so if we do 5 gallons of water, that's water for two people per day, according to the calculation that I gave you at the beginning of the video. So you could see where if you have to haul it by hand, it's gonna be a very labor intensive thing. Another thing you need to look for is there a lake or a year round pond within 1,000 feet. You can always collect water from these standing things. You're gonna have to purify it. Any water that you bring into your household, you're gonna have to purify somehow. Either the entity that runs the water supply system does it, or you're gonna have to do it. And the reason why I say a lake or year-round pond is because you'll get these ponds that dry up during the year, and if that happens, and you're relying on that as a water source, then that could be an issue for you. The next thing we want to look for is a year-round creek or river within 1,000 feet. Again, we're thinking about walking distance from the property. Hopefully, it's on your property. And a year-round creek or river is one that runs every single day of the year. It's not dependent on the drought system, where the drought will cause it to dry up through the summer, or you have to wait for rainfall for it to run. And that leads us to the next one, is an intermittent creek or waterway. Drainage canals or irrigation canals that flood periodically, creeks that only run whenever it's raining. Those can still be used, although you have to really watch them and be able to take advantage of them whenever they're running. Okay, and the final thing that you should look at for your property or where you live is how much rainfall do you get. Your wells, your lakes, your streams, your ponds, your rivers, those are all dependent on how much rainfall you get. If you live in the desert and you only get 5 inches of rainfall a year, or precipitation, because we're also talking about snowfall. So how much precipitation you get, you've got a completely different set of water fundamentals that you have to worry about than if you're living in some place like the Pacific Northwest, where they get 100 inches of rain a year. So how much rain you get really makes a huge difference. And I'm talking about on your property, and I tend to focus on homesteads because that's where we live, but this applies any place. Whether you're living in an apartment or on a suburban lot, you can. This is very important to you, all right, and you have to know where this stuff is, because you have to be able to go get yourself some water for survival or just everyday living. The next thing you need to think about before we get into some of the more nutsy boltsy type of things, you really need to know the laws in your area. You need to understand the laws on gathering water, on drilling wells, on creating ponds. The last thing you need to do is to do something to take care of your water preparedness and then have the government come in and try to tell you, no, you can't do that, and start fining you. There was a guy up in Idaho, I think it was, or maybe it was Utah. But anyway, he built a pond. He built a retainment pond, so whenever it rained, that pond would fill up. He was using it as a stock pond, and the state came in and started fining him thousands of dollars a month because he had an illegal pond, because the state decided that they owned all the rainfall that fell on the state, even though it was his private property. Same thing with Colorado. Colorado's the same way. You can't legally put rain catchment in without a permit, and they've got a really screwy law in Colorado where you have to pay people upstream if you're pulling water out of a water source like a river or something, you have to pay people upstream to maintain the replenishment of that or something like that. It's a really screwy rule uh, that they they have there, and but you have to know what these are. And if you're from Colorado and you know what I'm talking about, go ahead and put it in the comments down below, because people need to know about that. And this is such an important thing. They in the Western United States, where water is a very, very, very precious commodity, this has resulted in what they call water wars, where people are actually getting shot and killed because over water rights and access to water. Um, so these are very very important things to understand. Now that we've looked at the aspects of water sources for your property, let's talk about the next important thing in when it comes to water, and that's water collection and storage. So we have access to these water sources now. We have to worry about the what I call the three C's: capturing, containing, and cleaning. So we have to worry about that as part of our fundamental aspects of preparedness. First thing I'm going to say, there's a little tool. It's called the Silcox key, and it looks like a little metal X, and it's got different sized openings on the ends of it. And what that's for is opening drain spigots. Because these big buildings, commercial buildings, they've got these spigots without a handle on it, or maybe the handle's broken off your spigot at home. Well, a Silcox key will allow you to open and close those spigots and get water. And the reason why I think this is important, and why I mention this first, is because it's a everyday carry tool that you can have with you in case you run into a situation where you need water, and there's none readily available, but there's spigots there. Even in the event of a complete grid failure where there's no electricity to pump water, if you're in the city, and it's really important if you're in the city, I think. These big high-rise buildings, the water inside those buildings gravity fed, so they pump the water all the way up to the top of the building and put it in holding tanks, and then they let it go down via gravity. Well, the water spigots at the very bottom of the building on the outside or the inside are all pressurized until the water is completely gone. And even in a complete grid down situation, you should still be able to get some water for a certain amount of time using your Silcox key or something like that. Doing well, no, not something like that. Using a Silcox key and gathering water that way. So it's a very important everyday carry type of thing for you. The next thing we want to talk about is water collection containers inside the house. Zone 0 is your house in permaculture, and water is very important to daily life. You have to have a way to collect water in case of some sort of event happening, like the grid going down. How are you gonna collect water in the event of that happening? Some of the things that you look at is you can use 2-liter bottles. Those are fantastic water collection devices. Milk jugs that are cleaned out can be used in the short term. For long-term storage, they do not work very well because the plastic degrades and they start leaking. You can't stack them because the pressure above them will cause the ones on the bottom to collapse, and it's just they're not good for long-term storage. Another thing you could have is a water billet to put in your bathtub. You can buy on Amazon. I'll put a link down below. We actually have one, and if I remember correctly, I gave one to each one of the kids. I don't know. I got to check on that, and if I haven't, I need to get them some. Anyway, but what it is it's a giant plastic bag. You put it in your bathtub, and you stick it up to the faucet, and you turn the water on, and you fill it up, and it gives you. The one I have, I think, is 136, maybe 146 gallons. That's quite a bit of water saved up in one place. So, if you hear that something is going to happen, like there's going to be a power outage, a winter storm, and you're worried about your water supply, you can take one of these things, put it in the bathtub, fill it up, and get a little hand pump to pump the water out for you, and you can have emergency water on hand, right? So we want to look at those type of containers, and think outside the box. You could do all kinds of innovative things on where to store it. You may worry, you may be, a lot of people, especially if you're in an apartment, are worried about storage space. You could buy a case of water and slide it underneath your bed. If your bed's not up high enough, stick stick bricks underneath each corner. Put a duvet on it, so that a duvet, that's one of those little fabric things for you guys that goes around the bottom of the bed. That's what I get for being married for 32 years. Anyway, you can put one of those around the bottom of the bed and hide everything, and that gives you a great place to store stuff. Same thing with your couch. You can store stuff under your couch, and there's all kinds of places. Naturally, the more space you have in your house, the more spaces you have to store stuff. So we've talked about collecting water in the event of emergency. What if you need to turn your water off or on? Do you know how to do that? And I did not bring one in, and I apologize. But you need a water service wrench or a water service key. And what it is, it's a great big T made out of metal. On the bottom of it, it's got a little U-shaped thing, and you open up the water meter cover, and it's out in your yard. It's that big round thing that says water service or whatever. Take that off, and you can stick this down in there, and you can turn the main water off and on for your house. Now, turning it off, why would you want to turn it off? Well, if you're on municipal or rural water and that supply gets contaminated and you don't want it to get into your system, you can go out and turn that off. Turn the main off. That way that water that could be potentially contaminated is not getting into your water supply system. It's not getting inside your house. Whenever the all clear sounded, go out, turn it back on, and run your water to completely flush out the system, because there's chances are you can get something coming on the front end. But you want to be able to turn that off, and you don't want anybody to inadvertently turn something on and get that contaminated water into your water system, right? So having one of those, and you can get them at a hardware store. I think they're like maybe $10-12, and they're great to have. You may never have to use it, but as a homeowner, I've used mine several times as I'm working on the water system out in the yard. I'm working on spigots coming in that are run off the main line. I can go out and turn that off and be perfectly safe and not have to worry about it. The next thing we want to talk about, and I'm doing this. These may not be in the order you think they should be in. I'm kind of doing them in the order that I thought was the most logical, and none of them is more important than the other. They're all pretty much the same when it comes to importance here. All right. So the next thing we want to talk about is if you've got a well on your property, do you have a wind or solar powered pump on your well? And the reason why I put this on there is because if you run an electric well or an electric pump on your well, the power goes out, you don't have water. That well, all the money you spend on that well is completely wasted if you have no way to power it, if you're off grid. So putting a windmill, a wind pump or a solar powered pump on your well as a backup or even as a primary. That's what we've got. We've got a shallow well here that I'm going to put a 12-volt pump on, and it only pumps 6.2 gallons per minute, but that's going to be more than enough to fill up the tanks, the stock tanks, whenever I need to. So, it's not the most powerful well pump, but it works perfectly fine. 6.2 gallons a minute's a pretty decent flow. So you need to think about that. Now, the next thing we need to talk about, and we're still up and around the house, and we're still around our outbuildings here. We need to think about a rainwater harvesting system, and that's rain catchment off your buildings. When it rains, the water hits your roof, it flows off, and if you go out and you look, you're losing a lot of water that you could store for future use by not capturing stuff that comes off your building. And here's a calculation. I'll throw it up here. Here you go. So to determine how much rainfall you're collecting off any roof surface, you take the length times width of your roof, the dimensions of your roof in inches, to equal the square inches of the roof, times how many inches of rain fell. and that will tell you how much rainwater came off that surface during the last rain. All right, and this is important to know because you need to scale your catchments to collect the maximum amount of water before it starts overflowing and flowing out onto the ground. Um, so if your house is a great big house, a little tiny 45-gallon rain barrel that you get from Costco or Lowe's or Home Depot or something is not going to collect very much water coming off that roof. You're still going to lose a lot of stuff. Um, we had a 325-gallon IBC tote hanging off our house at the last place, and I only collected off of one side of the roof. The water on the front I let hit the ground because it was keeping the foundation moisturized so the ground wouldn't dry out and it wouldn't crack. But the stuff coming off the back, that 325-gallon IBC tote, I don't think it, maybe over the course of 8 or 9 years, I think it only went dry once. Seriously. So we were catching enough water off that system that we could do that. But you should, any surface that's got water that you can collect off of, you should be putting gutters on and putting rain catchment systems on it. It's a simple way, and it helps alleviate the cost of either running a well or a municipal, paying municipal or rural water prices. So there's something to think about. The next thing, once you have your rain barrels in place and your water catchment, you can use commercial rain barrels. You can use food grade 55-gallon drums. You could use IBC totes. Once we get those done, we move up to a different level of water storage and a cistern. If you have a cistern on your house, and what a cistern is just a big tank that's used to hold collected rainwater. And I've seen houses that had great big giant cisterns built into them. The one guy that I met had 15,000 gallons of water stored in his house in a cistern that he could open up a door and look in and see how much water was in it. If you're looking at building a cistern, you can build a cistern very easily. Modern poly septic tanks can be sealed up and used as water cisterns. You bury them, fill them full of water so they don't pop out of the ground at the first rain, and you've got a way to store all this water that you've collected off your roofs. So that's something to think about. And if you've got a cistern, you need to check it periodically, because if it's cement, that eventually the water will erode the cement away, and you may end up having to replace it because it'll get cracked or it'll start caving in. So after we've collected our rainwater into our barrels or into our cistern, the next thing we need to worry about is purification, and that's the cleaning part. The cleaning part of it. There's all kinds of ways. One of the basic things, anytime anybody gets into the survivalism or preparedness, first thing they do is they go out and they buy a little water filter, either a Sawyer or a Life Straw. Those are fantastic. I recommend that everybody go out and buy, well, honestly, as many as you can afford. Having them on hand is really, it's an easy way to filter water out. The problem is the capacity. They tend to be a little slow. Eventually, they get clogged. They wear out over time. So we want to think about bigger purification systems. So the next step up from those little handheld filters are bigger filters. And the one, if you look right here over my shoulder, that's the Berkey, and that's probably the premier homestead water filter system. And we just fill the water from the tap, pour the water in there, and let it filter. And we've got a smaller one over in the other corner, the travel, or is it the Travel Berkey? That may be the one up from the Travel Berkey, but it's a lot smaller. It's probably a third the size of this one. But they're a great way. There are other filter systems out there, and you can even make your own. They actually sell kits where you can make your own filter systems out of 5-gallon buckets, and they work. They use the same filters as Berkey's. You can use Berkey filters. You can use the small ceramic filters. It just depends on how extravagant you want to get. Um, and then once you get beyond these gravity fed systems, um, you've got systems in the house that run off of UV lights and chemicals. And if you go over to Life Done Free, Tag and B's channel, he talks about his water purification system on one of his videos. I'll see if I can't find it and put the link up here for you guys. But he uses a mechanical filter, and then he uses a series of UV filters to purify the water, because all their water is coming either off of rainwater or off the well. So they're having to purify every drop of water that comes into their house. They're having to do it, and eventually I'd like to get that in place here. There's some other things here at the new homestead that are higher on the priority list, but eventually I'd like to get to that point. So that's something to think about. And you can go out on YouTube. All these things I'm talking about, all these filter systems and building your own and building. You can build a sand filter with activated charcoal in it for filtering large quantities of water. But you can go out on YouTube, or you can find books. I'd rather you go out and you bought books that talked about this and had them in your collection than going to YouTube and relying on that, because number one, YouTube's not always going to be there. Number two, if you're like me, man, I've forgotten way more knowledge than I remember, right? And so it's always good to have these things on a shelf someplace as reference, rather than relying on electronic bits of data, all right? But you can find this information out, and it's really good. Okay, so we've talked about water collection and cleaning in zone 0 around the house, or off your outbuildings or your coops and such. Not done with water collection. There's a couple more things we need to talk about on the bigger scale on your property. And this is something, if you've got a yard, if you're in a condo with a small yard, or a suburban lot, or 12 acres like we are, this is something you can do. Talk about permaculture swells. Now, all a swell is a trench dug on contour. The trenches on the uphill side, the hill that you create from the dirt you took out of the ground, is on the downhill side. Water flows downhill, hits this trench, and collects in that trench until it overflows, and then it flows down the hill. It goes around the swell, and it goes down the hill, or it goes over the top of the swell. But what happens is that water, anytime water stops, it starts soaking into the ground. And swells are used to rehydrate the ground and drought-proof your ground. They're a fantastic thing to incorporate into any homestead that you're trying to use, or if you're on a suburban lot and you're wondering, okay, how do I dig trenches in contour? Here's what I did. I had my garden, and it was on a little slope, and what I did was the walkways in between the rows, I sunk them down about 4 inches, so they were lower than the garden beds, and then I made it so on alternating ends there was a cut, so whenever the trench filled up, or the walkway filled up, the water would get to a certain level, then it would flow through that opening down into the next walkway. And so it was like a S. The water flowed like this down the hill. And what would happen is when it would rain, the water would hit the ground, it would flow down the hill into my garden, it would collect in the walkways, and then it would soak in or evaporate from there. And so even during times of low rainfall, I was still able to collect quite a bit of water, and I had a really, really wet, not really wet, that's really well hydrated soil. And so we can do that. You can do that in a garden like that, even if it's flat. You can dig these trenches, and it'll fill up instead of running off the property. On a acreage like mine, you could have swells that are 1 mile, 2 miles long. It just it depends on how you design them. And if you go to Special Operations Equipment, I think that's where the video is, or maybe go to Billy and William's Permapasture Farms channel. Go there. They did a swell class this summer, at the SOE compound that was really great. They talked about it, and they did a video on it, and I think it's available. I don't know if it's behind a paywall or not, but I know that they talked about it on their videos, and they gave you an overview of it. So go check that out, and hopefully next summer I'm going to be building some swells out here, and I'll be able to get some video of it. So that's something to think about. Another thing that is on the list is ponds. Suppose you don't have a pond and you want to build one. Here's some things to think about before you do that. So the rule of thumb, and mind you, this is a rule of thumb. This is not a steadfast granite rule. Rule of thumb is for unwooded area, you need to have 10 acres for every acre of pond as runoff. And what that means is the amount of water that falls on 10 acres is what it's going to take to fill up your pond. And the amount of rainfall you get is also going to develop. But like I said, that's a rule of thumb. And then if it's a wooded area, you need about 20 acres because the trees are going to suck up a lot of water, and so you need a little bit more. And I know that sounds like a lot of area, but actually it's not. And you can talk to I am not a pond guy. I know how to build them. I have never built one, and so you need to talk to a professional pond person about what it takes to build a pond on your property. And then, since we're talking, swells and ponds, they drought proof our property. They make it so that we're able to get water even when there hasn't been any rainfall. The final thing I want to talk about is using hugel mounds or woody mounds, which are nothing more than smaller hugel mounds, to drought proof your garden. Whenever you're building your garden, what a hugel mound is, they take wood and they stack it up and they cover it with dirt and they plant stuff on it. And the reason why they put the wood inside there, because as the wood decays and rots, it turns into a sponge and it starts collecting all the water. The water hits that mound and it soaks into that wood, and it'll stay there and it drought proofs it. And you can do the same thing in your suburban garden or your kitchen garden on your rural property. You can do that with any of your beds. You can create woody mounds, and you're just, instead of stacking it up 4 feet tall and 15 feet wide, because some of these hugelkultur mounds in Germany are literally 20 feet tall. I mean, they're huge. Go out and do a little searching on the YouTube or on the internet, and you can see the size of some of these mounds. They're truly impressive, and they will grow stuff. They're so large they create their own microclimates. If you face them east and west, you've got the backside where the sun never shines on it can be 10 to 15 degrees cooler than on the front side. So they're large enough they can create their own microclimates. But you can do that, like I said, you can do that on your garden. If you're building raised beds or you're digging a new bed, you're clearing out for a new bed. Dig a trench where underneath your rows are going to be, and just put wood in there, stomp it down, compress it, and then build your garden row on top of that, and that'll help drought proof those garden rows. And if you incorporate that with the little mini swell in the garden, that water will sit in that swell, it'll soak into the ground, it'll get in that wood, and it does a really good job of drought proofing. Same with raised beds. If you've got a raised bed, any time I build a raised bed, I put wood on the bottom of it. I put about 8 to 10 inches of wood at the bottom of the beds. The small garden beds that you see out in front of the house, it's exactly what I did with that. And then you fill it full of dirt, and it helps drought proof it. It also helps whenever the wood's decomposing, it drops nutrients back in the soil. So it does that too as an added benefit. But that's a way that you can drought proof your garden beds. And that's one of the fundamentals. We're talking about that whole capturing, collecting, and cleaning of the water, and that's a great way to capture water in your garden. Well, that's about it for the different aspects of the water fundamental of full spectrum preparedness and full spectrum homesteading. I hope you guys found this entertaining and informative. As time goes on, like I said in the last video, we've got a lot of work to do on the homestead, so we will be doing nuts and bolts videos. We'll be talking specifically how to do these things individually and show you how to do it. In the meantime, until we do those videos, there's all kinds of videos out there for you to watch. So go out and study up on it. It's actually, water management on your property is actually a pretty fascinating topic because there's so many different moving parts in it to try to understand and incorporate, you know. And it's good to get other people's views on it and see how they do something. Well, if you like this video, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. That lets YouTube know that you enjoyed this type of content and you want to see more of it. Hit the notification bell because I'm going to be doing these fundamentals of full spectrum preparedness videos until we've gone through all 10 of them, and then we'll start drilling down and talking about more like each one of the specifics inside these fundamentals or these different aspects. Hit that notification bell so you know when we drop those videos. Yoda's got some really neat cooking videos coming up that I think people will enjoy. And then I got some interviews. I'm interviewing some people, and we're going to do some live streams that are different than our homestead update that I think people will enjoy. So hit that notification bell. Share this with somebody that might find it useful or enjoyable. But most importantly, go out and live a life done free. Take care. Thanks, Milo.